The Borderlands series has always been one of my favorites, and personally, I can't wait for Borderlands 4 to release. However, it seems unlikely that we'll be able to play it on the Steam Deck because of the high minimum system requirements, which makes me a little sad. Still, the older games in the series are a ton of fun, and with Borderlands 4 coming soon, I wanted to check them out and see just how playable all of them are on the go. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to check out all the Borderlands games that are currently released and how they run on the Steam Deck. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. The recording of these games did spike battery drain a bit, so it's going to be 2 to 3 watts higher than what you can expect when you're playing yourself. Before we get into this, there are two versions of Borderlands 1, the normal Game of the Year edition and the enhanced Game of the Year edition. The enhanced version includes updated visuals, new weapons, new customization options, golden chests and keys, and more. However, buying the enhanced edition also comes with the original Game of the Year edition, so we're going to be covering both. However, let's start with the Enhanced Edition. Starting with Borderlands Game of the Year Enhanced Edition, I can say it plays fantastically on the Steam Deck. Even though it's an updated version, it's still based on an older game. We do still have to go through the launcher, which feels a bit cumbersome, but it's ultimately worthwhile. It'll be able to handle 90 frames per second at least most of the time, though I did notice a couple of times where battery drain would spike from the average 11 watt to 13 watt to around 19 watts. Bringing it down to 60 frames per second will mitigate this and bring the average frame rate down to 8 watts to 11 watts, but if you want to play at 90 frames per second, it should be doable. There are some stutters here and there, but nothing that disrupts gameplay too much. It's still an awesomely playable experience, and there's no complaints from me. Moving on to the original version, I see no reason to play this over the Enhanced Edition when it comes to performance. I turned all the settings to max when I tested it, since this is a very old game, but it ends up draining more battery at 60 frames per second than the Enhanced Edition. Granted, I wasn't playing the Enhanced Edition at the max quality settings, but it's still a little weird to see how demanding it is for such an old game that hasn't been updated. We do have to change the resolution manually in this game as well, but ultimately it is playable, just not a massive improvement over the Enhanced Edition. The normal version also says it does not have controller support, so you're not going to be seeing the correct controller icons when playing the game. Moving on to Borderlands 2, this is actually the first Borderlands game I played on a portable device, starting with Borderlands 2 on the PS Vita, and it felt a bit surreal starting it up on the Steam Deck. For whatever reason, the game starts in an undefined resolution, so you're going to have to change that in the settings to 1280 by 800. Once you're in game though, I can happily say it performed very well. I was able to keep 60 frames per second throughout my time in crowded areas and fighting tons of enemies. It did drain a little bit higher than Borderlands 1's Enhanced Edition, ranging around 11 watts to 15 watts, but it's still very playable and looks amazing at the 1280 by 800 resolution. 90 frames per second gameplay may be possible, but you probably are going to experience some drops every now and then. Other than that, there's not much more to say here. It's just gonna be a great time. This is my favorite Borderlands game to date, so I love seeing how it evolved from that questionable Vita port. Next, we have Borderlands the Pre-Sequel. Now, Borderlands the Pre-Sequel has a native Linux build, but we don't recommend using it. It has poor CPU performance, meaning you can't really play at 60 frames per second and doesn't support multiplayer matchmaking. So instead, force to use the Proton Experimental in your properties and use the No Launcher Launch option in your Steam game properties so you can skip the game's launcher. With these selected, you can go ahead and ramp all the graphical options up to max and select 1280 by 800 as the resolution. It all works perfectly. And you should be able to get a 60 frames per second experience with some nice looking visuals and power draw around the 12 to 14 watt range, so still very similar to Borderlands 2, which makes sense since they were released so close to each other. Next up, we have the newest mainline game in the series, Borderlands 3. This is where it starts to get harder to run. The game defaults to low settings and we recommend keeping them there. At low, you can run at 60 frames per second for a decent amount of the time, but do expect some dips in more intense situations. This one also supports 1280 by 800 as a resolution, and the game looks still pretty decent at low settings. However, if you want the most stable experience, we are going to recommend setting it to 40 frames per second. It should bring down power draw in general, but if you keep it at 60 frames per second, it's going to be around 19 to 21 watts. Now we start to head to the spin-offs, and we're going to start with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which is technically the newest release in the Borderlands franchise, not including Borderlands 4. While Tiny Tina Wonderland is technically a spin-off of Borderlands, it still retains that first-person looter-shooter mechanics that the series is known for. Performance in general is very similar to Borderlands 3, but it can handle higher quality settings due to levels being more contained. The default settings are a mix of high quality and can keep performance around 45 frames per second on average with a high battery drain. To get the most stable experience, I do recommend setting to 40 frames per second, but even if you set to 45, it'll still be a pretty great experience. Just expect some drops here and there in very intense scenes. Next up, we have Tales from the Borderlands, which is an old game developed by Telltale Games. While not one of the mainline games that shares its core gameplay loop, Tales from the Borderlands is still a fantastic experience, taking place in the same world. This entry is very story-focused with almost no first-person gunplay, so if you've played any other Telltale games, it's going to be very similar to what you've experienced so far. Because it's not as open and a relatively older game, it runs like a charm. Sticks around 8 watts to 11 watt battery drain on the default highest settings and 90 frames per second. There's no launcher, but you will have to manually change the resolution to 1280 by 800. And finally, we have New Tales from the Borderlands, which is a sequel to Tales from the Borderlands and still retains that story-driven gameplay. However, this one was not developed by Telltale, moving in-house to Gearbox. For the most part, it runs relatively well, but there are instances of drops when out in the city and using some technology, like the goggles and holograms. Some angles in the city can also drop, but it generally sticks above 60. But when using those technologies, it can drop below 60, sometimes going around 45 to 50. Regardless, I would still consider it playable. 45 frames per second lock should cover throughout the whole game, while 60 frames per second will cover the majority of it. 90 will not be stable enough to get through the game, so I don't recommend it. And those are all the Borderlands games that have released and how they perform on the Steam Deck. Honestly, for what it's worth, it's still great to go back and play Borderlands 2 and 3, and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is a blast as well. So even if we can't play Borderlands 4 on the deck, we're still going to be able to get that Borderlands experience that we might otherwise be missing in Borderlands 4. Even still, I'm very excited for Borderlands 4's release, and I cannot wait to try it out for myself. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. And a huge thank you to our patrons. You guys are awesome. See you next time.